experienced many things, but we are Chris County. We are strong. We will survive. As we prepare to enter into the second phase of this year, I ask for your vote and your support in my candidacy to be the next Chief Magistrate of Chris County. We can do this. We will do this. And with your support, I will be the next Magistrate Judge of Chris County. Thank you for your support.
Cordial's WSST, because local matters.
Yes,
the J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The following family would like to thank their many friends for the food, flowers, condolences, telegrams, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Ronnie Lee Williams, better known as Skip, of 507 Winder Street, Andersonville, Georgia, died Monday, June 29, 2020, at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Ronnie Lee Williams was held Friday, July 3rd, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. The Reverend Norris Harris, pastor of the St. Paul AME Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted companion, Mrs. Glenda Spivey of Andersonville, Georgia, his loving children, Mr. Roderick Miles of Americus, Georgia, Mr. Derek Spivey and his wife, Ms. Eugenia Spivey, and Mr. Corey Spivey of Andersonville, Georgia. 7 beloved grandchildren, his loving and devoted sister, Miss Mamie Brown, and her husband, Mr. Tim Sutton of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brother, Mr. Edward Williams of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved aunt, Mrs. Annie B. Carter of Vienna, Georgia. His nieces and nephews, Ms. LaTanya Quarterman, Ms. Sophia Williams, Mr. Edward Williams, Jr., Mr. Sean Williams, and Ms. Shateria Williams, all of Cordele, Georgia. A host of great nieces, great nephews, great nieces, and great nephews, a host of other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mr. Ronnie Lee Williams of 507 Winder Street, Andersonville, Georgia. Again, the family would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during the hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week for Mr. Ronnie Lee Williams of Andersonville, Georgia. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, were in charge of this arrangement during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Miss Geneva Angrish of 507 Hearthwood Drive, Kathleen, Georgia, died Wednesday, July 1st at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Miss Maisha Brown and her husband, Mr. Charles Brown, and Mr. Marcelo Angrish, all of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved grandchildren, Tobias D. Luster, Mr. Trayvon Brown, Mr. Tratavius D. Brown, Mr. Charles W. Brown III, and Mr. Robert J. Angrish III, all of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved companion, her beloved brothers, the Reverend Robert Angrish and his wife, Mrs. Marcia Angrish, Mr. Thomas Angrish, Mr. Gary Angrish and his companion, Ms. Mary Holmes, and Mr. Christopher Denmark, all of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved aunts, Miss Eleanor Tyner of Americus, Georgia, Miss Bertha Tyner of Leslie, Georgia. Her sisters-in-law, Mrs. Anna Angrish and Miss Cynthia Angrish, both of Americus, Georgia. Her brother-in-law, Mr. Mike Arthur Whitehead Sr. of Americus, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include a special friend, Miss Michelle Fox of Americus, Georgia. Survived Miss Geneva Angrish of 207 Hearthwood Drive, Kathleen, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Geneva Angrish will be held Thursday, July 9th, graveside at 11 a.m. at Staley Memorial Garden in Americus, Georgia. Her beloved brother, the Reverend Robert Angrish, will officiate. The funeral service for Miss Geneva Angrish will be held Thursday, July 9th at 11 a.m. graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. Her beloved brother, the Reverend Robert Angrish, will officiate. Mrs. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree of 206 East 20th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, June 28th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Sam Roundtree of Cordele, Georgia, her loving and caring son, Mr. Samuel D. Davis, and his wife, Mrs. Raquetta Davis, and Mr. Emmanuel Roundtree, all of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved stepdaughter, Miss Letitia Hill of Cordele, Georgia. 6 beloved grandchildren, her beloved aunts and uncles, the Reverend Solomon Wallace and his wife, Mrs. Calden Wallace of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Aaron Wallace and his wife, Mrs. Annie Eva Wallace of Unadilla, Georgia, and Mrs. Bertha May Coleman of Atlanta, Georgia. Her beloved nieces and nephews, a host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include her special friend, Mrs. Evolia Solomon and her husband, Mr. Eddie Solomon, Mrs. Mary Starks and her husband, Mr. Michael Starks, all of Cordele, Georgia. Survived Mrs. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree of 216 East 20th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree will be held Friday, July 10th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Big Poplar Spring Church Cemetery in Unadilla, Georgia. Her beloved cousin, the Reverend Eveline Wallace, will officiate. Retired educator, Miss Donella McEntee of 301 South Azalea Circle, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, June 26th at the Coliseum Medical Center in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Annie Ruth Wallace of Hollywood, Florida, Mrs. Mary Griffin of Miami, Florida, Mrs. Maddie Rogers Foster, and her husband, Mr. Willie J. Foster of Hollywood, Florida. A beloved brother, Mr. James H. McEntee of Anniston, Alabama. 2 beloved stepbrothers, Deacon Willie C. Kendrick of Unadilla, Georgia, and Mr. Myron Kendrick. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Retired educator, Miss Donella McEntee of 301 South Azalea Circle, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for retired educator Mrs. Donella McEntee will be held Saturday, July 11th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Mount Zion Church Cemetery in Unadilla, Georgia. Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis of 303 East 16th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, June 30th at her residence. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. William Henry Dennis, Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved daughter, Miss Chantilla Collins of Cordele, Georgia. 3 beloved grandchildren. 1 loving sister, Miss Catherine Kears Brown of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Jim Daniel Kears Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Ruth G. Kears of Cocoa, Florida. Mr. Ernest L. Kears of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved aunts and uncle, Mrs. Willie Mae Boyne of Pohique, Florida, Miss Naomi Lewis of San Antonio, Texas, Miss Eleonora Randolph of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, Miss Beatrice Rump and Mr. Haskin Kears, both of Belglade, Florida. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis of 303 East 16th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. Miss Vicky Jean Waite of 502 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, July 2nd at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Miss India Jackson, Miss Mariah Jackson, Miss Chester Waite, all of Cordele, Georgia. 4 loving grandchildren, her beloved brothers, Mr. Danny White and Mr. Scotty White, both of Pennsylvania, her one sister-in-law, a host of other relatives, and many sorrowing friends to include Miss Mary Baldwin, Miss Vicky Collier, Miss Ladrika Brown, and Mr. James Brown, all of Cordele, Georgia, survived Miss Vicky Jean Waite of 508 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Vicky Jean Waite will be announced at a later date pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. And now for a special funeral notice outside of our community. U.S. Navy veteran Mr. Robert Butts Jr., a native of Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, June 27th at the Dora VA Medical Center in Columbia, South Carolina. Locally, he survived by his beloved brother, the Reverend Joe Lee Butts of Cordele, Georgia, and the members of the Mount Zion First African Baptist Church, where he served over the years. The Bullock's Funeral Home of Sumter, South Carolina, is in charge of the arrangements. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And now for announcements. The new Poplar Spring Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, Sunday morning worship will be today at 9:45 a.m. and Wednesday evening at 6:45 p.m. via conference call. Please dial 253-993-3761. 253-993-3761. The New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, Sunday morning worship will be today at 9:45 a.m. Wednesday evening at 6:45 p.m. via conference call. Please dial 253-993-3761. The Reverend Johnny Dean, pastor, New Poplar Spring Baptist Church, Byronville, Georgia. The Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church conference call schedule as follows: Sunday morning worship at 10 a.m., Tuesday midday prayer conference at 12 noon, Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. 229-329-7611. The Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church conference call schedule as follows. This morning, first Sunday in July at 10 a.m. Please join at 229-329-7611. Or you may join the Facebook Live at 10:15 a.m. Mother Lucille Shazer, Church Mother, Deacon Kenneth Smith, Program Chairman, Deacon Tommy Ford Jr., Vice Chairman of Deacons, Dr. K.M. Williams, Pastor. Congratulations to Pastor Frankie Harmon, who will graduate Saturday, July 11th from Southwest Georgia Theological Seminary with a doctoral degree. You're invited to drive by, honk, and wave at her graduation parade Saturday evening. The lineup for the parade will be at 5 p.m. on the corner of Judy Avenue and Culpeper Road. The parade will start at 5:30 p.m. The parade will go up Culpeper Road to New Harvest Road, around Charlie Lee Circle, back to New Harvest Road, and end at Culpeper Road. Again, congratulations to Pastor Frankie Harmon, Dr. Frankie Harmon, who will graduate Saturday, July 11th from Southwest Georgia Theological Seminary with a doctoral degree. You're invited to drive by, honk, and wave at her graduation parade Saturday evening. The lineup for the parade will be at 5 p.m. on the corner of Judy Avenue and Culpeper Road. The parade will start at 5:30 p.m. Again, congratulations to our very own Dr. Frankie Harmon. Friends, that conclude our announcements for this morning, and we do pray that you would govern yourselves accordingly. And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of United States Navy veteran Mr. Charles Norman Hicks of Plains, Georgia, who departed this life June 30th, 2012. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Marilyn Hicks, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Gertha Bryant, who departed this life July 4th, 2012. Dedication requested by the Lofton, Mays, and Bryant families. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mr. Lester C. Williams, who departed this life July 5th, 2019. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Wilhelmina Williams, and the entire Williams and Rogers family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Bertha Mrs. Beulah Patterson, who departed this life July 6, 1993. Dedication requested by her beloved family, gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following. Happy birthday to our dear beloved Mother Fannie Mae James, church mother of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church, who celebrated her birthday Thursday, July 2nd. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, the entire James family, and all of the members of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church. Our very own Mother Fannie Mae James, celebrating her birthday this past Thursday, July 2nd. God bless you, and many, many more. Happy birthday to Mr. Johnny Dennis, who celebrated his birthday Thursday, July 2nd. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Barbara Dennis, his beloved daughters, grandchildren, and the Dennis, Colson, and McGill family. Happy birthday to Miss Gwen Westbrook, who celebrated her birthday Friday, July 3rd. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, her beloved mother, her brothers, and the entire McGill family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Wilhelmina Williams, who celebrated her birthday, will celebrate her birthday Monday, July 6th. Dedication requested by the Rogers, King, and Telfair families, and the Reverend Isaac H. Owens and family. Happy birthday to Mr. Wynn Jones, who will celebrate his birthday Tuesday, July 7th. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Mrs. Angela Jones, and his beloved children. Happy birthday to Miss Ann Brooks, who will celebrate her birthday Tuesday, July 7th. Dedication requested by her beloved mother, Mrs. Carrie Brooks, and the entire family. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: Mrs. Christine White and family, Mother Nell Ford and family, Mrs. Clara Redden and family, the Reverend Layfield Buckholtz and family of Unadilla, Georgia, the family of the late Mrs. Mamie Lou Blackburn, Evangelist Dorothy Sims Williams and family, prayer warrior, Mrs. Martha Clay and family, Deacon and Mrs. John Wiggins and family, Mrs. Willie McGill and family, Mrs. Geraldine Johnson and family, Deacon William and Mrs. Robbie Durham and family, Mr. and Mrs. Sam Hill and family, Mr. and Mrs. Paul Johnson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Ernest Reese and family, Deacon Eddie Porter and family, Mrs. Denise Denard and family, Mr. and Mrs. Melvin Jones and family, Mrs. Martha Ann Cross and family, Mr. Lonnie Walker and family, Mrs. Carol Jackson and family, Pastor and Elder Billy Sanford and family, Deacon and Mrs. Alfred Hoggerbrook and family, Mrs. Gladys Foster and family, the Gamble family, Mr. and Mrs. Bruford Royal Jr. and family, Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Short and family, Mrs. Dora Taylor and family, Miss Tawana Leonard and family, Mrs. Jacqueline Leonard and family, Mr. Robert Lee McLeod and family, Mr. Charles McLeod and family, Miss Nettie Bush and family, Mr. and Mrs. Alvin Beal and family, Mother Minnie Fletcher and family, Mrs. Ruby Felton and family, Brother and Mrs. James Leon Hughes and family, Deacon James Smith and family, Miss Charlie Butts and family, Miss Linda Askew and family, Miss Janice Montfrey and family, Mrs. Dorothy King and family, mother and daughter, Mrs. Fannie Royal and family, Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Ford and family, Miss Johnny Campbell and family, Miss Betty Griffin and family, the Spears family, Mrs. Aletha Askew, church clerk of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church, and trustee, the Reverend and Mrs. Dion Jones and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Charles Perry Jr. and family, Deacon and Mrs. Rodney Teal and family, Dr. and Mrs. Henry Young and family, Miss Betty Roberson and family, past Commissioner and Mrs. A.J. Rivers and family, Mrs. Ida Ruth Bryant and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jerome Outlaw and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Willie E. Lockett and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jerry Lester and family, the King family, Deacon Michael Holden family, Miss Vivian Telfair and family, Deacon and Mrs. Otis Ray and family, Mr. and Mrs. Lucius Bagley and family, the Hayward Hopper family, the Venable family, Minister and Mrs. Douglas Parham and family, Miss Cynthia White and family, Mrs. Irma Tyson and family, Judge Gail Sims and family, Mr. Ernest Kears and family, Mrs. Betty Dotson and family, Miss Sarah Henderson and family, Mr. Tara Wilson and family, Mr. Herman Neely and family of Ashburn, Georgia, Miss Sandra Jackson and family, Dr. Eutha D. Didell and family, Miss Mary Kitchen and family, Miss Betty Wallace and family, Miss Serena Williams and family, Mr. and Mrs. Curtis Ezel and family, Mrs. Curtis Ezel and family, and the staff of BJ's Diner and the entire Felton family, Miss Ruby Jones and family, Mr. and Mrs. Roosevelt Williams and family, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony West and family, Mrs. Willie Ruth Jones and family, Deacon and Mrs. Greg Frederick and family, Deacon Isaiah Carter family, Mrs. Mr. Benny Hamilton and family, Deacon and Mrs. Dan Colson and family, Deacon and Mrs. Willie Colson and family, Mrs. Valerie Royal and family, Miss Geraldine Perry and family, Dr. Ruby Jackson and family, the family of the late Reverend Grover Mathis, Mrs. Juanita Lewis and family, Mr. Michael Lane and family, Mr. and Mrs. Arnold, Governor Arnold and family, Deacon and Mrs. Garrett Parham and family, Deacon and Mrs. Frank Brown and family, Mrs. Johnny Bell and family, Minister Dicey Relaford and family, Mother Mary Hall and family, Miss Bessie Slay and family, Miss Regina Bryan and family, Miss Brenda Den and family, Miss Clorinda Hicks and family, and Mrs. Willie Mae Mobley family, gone but not forgotten. Our first selection for this morning.
There's nobody greater. Peter wasn't greater. He's still in the grave. Muhammad wasn't greater. He's still in the grave. But Jesus Christ of Nazareth is the only God they put in the grave. But 3 days later, oh, go check out the tomb. He ain't there. You can check it out. He ain't there no more. Because he's sitting on the right hand of his Father. So we have a simple song we sing. It says, I searched all over, couldn't find nobody. I searched high and low, I still couldn't find nobody. Nobody greater. Yes, sir. Nobody greater. Nobody greater than you. Yeah. Oh my. I searched all over, couldn't find nobody. Listen, I searched high and low, I still couldn't find nobody. Hallelujah. Nobody greater. Nobody greater. Nobody greater than you. Help me say it, y'all. I searched all over, couldn't find. Searched high and low. Still couldn't find. Nobody greater. Nobody greater. Nobody greater than you. Can we worship God tonight? Look at him.
May Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia, Mr. Simon Felden family, Mrs. Johnny Bell Sanders and family, the Reverend and Mrs. Keith Lewis and family, Mr. and Mrs. George Rackard and family, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Black and family, Miss Pamela Law and family, Mr. Harvey C. and family, Mother Blotty Bill and family, Byronville, Georgia, Miss Maddie West and family, Mr. and Mrs. John Leroy Perry and family, the Cantrell family, the Hardrick family, Miss Marion Felton and family, Mrs. Bobby Jean Vandro and family, Mr. and Mrs. W. D. King and family, Mrs. Christine Kingdom and family, Mr. and Mrs. Purnell Laitler and family, Dr. and Mrs. Thaddeus Laitler and family, Mrs. Dorothy Lamar and family, Deacon Willie C. Kendrick and family, Ms. Cleo Hoggebrook and family, Mrs. Percentia Woodson and family, Ms. Rosa Cooper and family, Ms. Lily Mae Perry and family, the Mike Hamilton family of Lily, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Emerson Lundy and family, the Granville family, Mr. Sylvester Granville and family, Mr. Arthur Lawson and family, Mrs. Calvin Baskin Jr. and family, Mr. Frank Thomas and family, Mrs. Molly Williams and family, Mrs. Shirley Jean Taylor and family, Mrs. Evelyn Thomas and family, Ms. G. Lundy and family, Mrs. Eunice Lewis and family, Mrs. Claudia Mae Dawson and family, Mr. and Mrs. Frank Armand and family, Mrs. Randall Lango and family, Mrs. Minnie Jewel Duhart and family, Mr. and Mrs. Wayne Adams and family, Deacon and Mrs. Willie Sutton and family, Miss Nanny Lee Burks and family, Mr. Tommy Rogers and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie Lee Taylor Sr. and family, the Crosby family, Deacon Chester Mike Williams and family, Mrs. Maddie Ruth King and family, Deacon and Mrs. Bruce Kendrick and family, Mr. Roger Duhart and family, Miss Doris Duhart and family, Mrs. Nora Lee Adams and family, Mrs. Athaline Perry and family, Mr. and Mrs. Clarence White and family, Miss Charlie Mae Peacock and family, Mr. and Mrs. Bobby Anderson and family, Mrs. Nettie Mae Wise and family, Mrs. Alton Jordan and family, Mr. and Mrs. Scotty Grant and family, the Clee Cross family, Mr. Clayton Dykes and family, Mrs. Charlotte Cheney family, Mr. Clayton, the Clayton family, Mrs. Harry Bird, Mr. Harry Bird Jr. and family, Ms. Kara Whelan family, Mrs. Lucille Bryant and family, Mr. Michael Sanders and family, Mrs. Lily Brown and family, Mr. and Mrs. Eddie James Walker and family, Byronville, Georgia, the Burks family, the Reverend and Mrs. Lewis Burden and family, Deacon and Mrs. Albert King Sr. and family, the Hazel Clark family, Commissioner and Mrs. Harry Ward and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie Davis, past mayor, Mrs. Ruthie Daniels and family, Mrs. Viola Green and family, Mrs. Pearlie Roundtree and family, Deacon and Mrs. Vet T. Crane and family, Pinehurst, Georgia, Miss Sarah Coleman family, Brother and Mrs. James Wise and family, Mrs. Margaret Jordan, retired educator, Deacon James Russell Burden family, Deacon and Mrs. Johnny Perry and family, Deacon George Jordan and family, Deacon Walter Brown and family, Mr. and Mrs. Winston Keaton and family, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur Morrell and family, Mrs. Martha Harris and family, Miss Mary Morrell and family, Mr. Mantle Lee Johnson and family, the Lester family, Mr. and Mrs. James Byram, Mr. James Byram and family, Mrs. Curtis Whitfield and family of Elko, Georgia, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Clark and family, Deacon John David Law, Chairman of the Board of Deacons of the Evergreen Baptist Church of Pinehurst, Georgia, Mrs. S.M.A. Davis and family, Mrs. Odessa Sheffield and family, Mrs. Bernitha Armstrong and family, Mr. Edgar Lee and family, Deacon and Mrs. Willie Fields and family, Deacon Mr. and Mrs. Jerome Jordan and family, Miss Christine Jordan and family, Mr. and Mrs. Willie B. Barnes and family of Vienna, Georgia. Our next selection for this morning goes out to Deacon and Mrs. Edgar Lester and family. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Ms. Geneva Angrish of 207 Hartwood Drive, Kathleen, Georgia, died Wednesday, July 1st at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia. The funeral service for Ms. Geneva Angrish will be held Thursday, July 9th at 11 a.m. graveside at Staley Memorial Garden in Americus, Georgia. Her beloved brother, the Reverend Robert Angrish, will officiate. Mrs. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree of 216 East 20th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, June 28th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree will be held Friday, July 10th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Big Poplar Springs Church Cemetery in Unadilla, Georgia. Her beloved cousin, the Reverend Evelyn Wallace, will officiate. Retired educator Ms. Donella McEntee of 301 South Azalea Circle, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, June 26th at the Coliseum Medical Center in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for retired educator Ms. Donella McEntee will be held Saturday, July 11th at 11 a.m. graveside at the Mount Zion Church Cemetery in Unadilla, Georgia. Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis of 303 East 16th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, June 30th at her residence. The funeral service for Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Miss Vicky Jean Waite of 508 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Thursday, July 2nd at Nevison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Vicky Waite will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Director, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our next and final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved family whose loved one was laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Ronnie Lee Williams of Andersonville, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Miss Geneva Angrish of Kathleen, Georgia and Americus, Georgia. The family retired educator Ms. Donella McEntee of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Ms. Jacqueline Denise Davis Roundtree of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Christine Kears Dennis of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Vicky Jean Waite of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to all of the sick and shut in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals and nursing homes and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out to all healthcare workers throughout the land. Our program is dedicated in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. The selection goes out to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall and family, to my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and to his wife, my sister, Ms. Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter. And again, happy anniversary to them who celebrated their anniversary during this past week. God bless you and continue to bless your union. This selection is dedicated to my sister, Mrs. Maddie Mae Johnson, better known as Sister Girl, and Mrs. Patsy Jackson and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church. Selection goes out to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, to his wife, Sister Kathy Williams, and family. And again, invite you to worship this first Sunday in July via conference call. Please dial 229-329-7611 at 10 a.m. 229-329-7611. You may join Facebook Live at 10:15 a.m. This selection is dedicated to our dear friend and brother, the Reverend Johnny Dean, pastor of the New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia. They invite you to worship with them this morning via conference call at 9:45 a.m. And you may dial 253-993-3761, 253-993-3761. Our program this morning goes out to my cousin, Deacon Emery Wright and family, the entire Wright family of Albany and Lee County, Georgia. Goes out to the Reverend Daniel Hall and family, and to our dear friend and brother, long-standing Deacon Jimmy Charles Montfred, chairman of the Board of Deacons of the Crossroad Baptist Church. Goes out to their pastor, the Reverend Nelson Maynard, and family, to the mother of the church, Mother Mary Jean Montfred, and family. The selection goes out to our mother, Mother Lucille Shazer, age 107, church mother of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. The selection goes out to our beloved Mrs. Easter May Sanders. I hope that she's feeling well this morning. Goes out to our beloved Commissioner Vesta Shepherd, and family. This selection again goes out to each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. We pray that you'll continue to be safe and continue to follow the CDC guidelines. Please wear your mask when you're traveling in and out of your home. Please wear your mask, friends and family, please. And again, you pray for me, and I'll pray for you. Our selection goes out to our chairman of the Board of Deacons, Deacon Tommy Ford of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, and his wife, Sister Great Dean Ford, and the entire family. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. And remember, in your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Some of these days, well, I'm going to walk out and take up my sleep.
I'm Isaac Owens. I'm a candidate for Chief Magistrate, Crisp County. Over the past couple of months, we've experienced many things, but we are Crisp County. We are strong. We will survive. As we prepare to enter into the second phase of this year, I ask for your vote and your support in my candidacy to be the next Chief Magistrate of Crisp County. We can do this. We will do this. And with your support, I will be the next Magistrate Judge of Crisp County. Thank you for your support.
Do you owe over $10,000 to the IRS? Believe me, you're